Welcome everyone to History Gone Wilder, part of How History Will Travel. I'm your host, Wilder historian Dr. Lucas Wilder, and last time I covered when Jefferson Davis replaced Joseph E. Johnston with John Bell Hood, and both sides crossed the Chattahoochee River. Now I move right into the Battle of Peachtree Creek. If you like what I do, please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't done so already, join the Patreon page, and purchase something from the Teespring store or Etsy shop. Every little bit helps. Thank you. Newly named Army of Tennessee Commander John Bell Hood inherited a divisive army, partly made as a result of his own promotion. As one historian said, rarely has a general assumed command of an army under more inauspicious circumstances than those facing John Bell Hood on the morning of Monday, July 18, 1864. William Hardee was Hood's most senior corps commander, and although he made it known he didn't want command of the army earlier in the year, Hood's promotion over him made him resent the young commander, and he requested being sent elsewhere, but to no avail. Alexander P. Stewart, a constant on the Western Theater battlefields where the Army of Tennessee took part, commanded Polk's former corps, but Stewart was inexperienced at corps command, having only been in command of the corps for 3 weeks when Hood took command of the army. When Hood was elevated, his most senior division commander, Carter L. Stevenson, took command of the corps, but only temporarily. Stevenson was with Edmund Kirby Smith during the invasion of Kentucky, was at Vicksburg when it was captured, and occupied Lookout Mountain during the battles for Chattanooga. However, there was a problem. Neither Hood nor the Confederate authorities believed in Stevenson's ability or believed him qualified for the temporary position. So, after only a quick stint as temporary corps commander, Hood named Benjamin F Cheum as temporary corps commander. Cheum was a division commander in Hood's corps, but had been with the Army of Tennessee since its inception. Although he allegedly was drunk during some battles, his men loved him, and his division was one of the more dependable ones in the Army. This most likely upset Stevenson. The permanent corps commander would be Stephen D. Lee. He was commanding the forces of Mississippi and part of Alabama when named to that position, so he'd have to make the journey to take command of the corps outside Atlanta. So Cheum would be in command until Lee got there. Nevertheless, Hood was going into battle with 2 new corps commanders, with his back against the city of Atlanta, in an unenviable position. Earlier, when Stewart took command of Polk's corps, William W. Loring had been passed over as commander of the corps, even though he commanded it temporarily during the Battle of Kennesaw Mountain. Loring had seniority over Stewart, and when Stewart was placed in that role, 34 of the corps officers petitioned for Loring to be named their commander, not Stewart. This caused a great deal of bad blood within the group. Every promotion had a ripple effect, with officers being raised up to fill the vacant spots. As historian Richard McMurray wrote, each change in division command, in turn, necessitated brigade-level changes. It seems likely, therefore, that the entire Army was pockmarked by pools of resentment among some of its colonels as officers from other divisions or even corps were transferred to replace men elevated to division command. Brigade-level pools of bitterness, in their turn, probably created similar resentments at the regimental level. Such command turmoil in the Army resulted in many troops being placed under officers whom they did not know. In such circumstances, soldiers often lack confidence in their new commander. Such lack of confidence, in turn, reduces an army's effectiveness. William T. Sherman's army group was across the Chattahoochee River, while Hood's army was in its defensive line south of Peachtree Creek. Sherman wanted to bolster his left flank that was swinging to the east, cutting a significant rail line at Decatur, and believing that Hood would block that force, ordered George Thomas to send his 4th Corps to the east to link up with Schofield. Thomas did as he was told, but kept one division of that corps with his main body, the division under John Newton. Thus, Thomas's Army of the Cumberland was weakened and a significant distance from the rest of Sherman's army group. Sherman had misjudged Hood's movements. Determined to crush a portion of Sherman's force, Hood, instead of being drawn to the east, decided to engage with Thomas along Peachtree Creek, hoping to smash the Army of the Cumberland against the Chattahoochee River, forcing it to surrender or bloody it enough that Sherman may fall back. He would make the attack with 2 of his corps, Hardee's and Stewart's, while Cheatham's corps faced east to block Sherman's left flank from entering the city. Hood called his commanders together on the morning of July 20th and outlined the plan. At 1 p.m., Hardee and Stewart would launch their attack, but instead of being a simple frontal assault, Hood ordered a more complicated in-echelon attack by divisions, so the right of the line would advance first and engage with the enemy left, and then division after division would continually engage to the left. If it worked, this would roll up Thomas's line and push them to the Chattahoochee River. However, miscommunication arose in the Army of Tennessee prior to the attack. It came when Hood began getting reports that Sherman's troops had cut the rail line and were pushing closer to the city. Naturally, he needed to block this approach, so he ordered Cheatham to move his corps closer to the railroad. A gap would be created if the rest of the army wasn't shifted, so Hood instructed Hardee and Stewart to move their corps each a half a division in length to the east. The miscommunication occurred when Cheatham moved all the way to the railroad without informing Hood. Hardee and Stewart, who were to stay connected with Cheatham, moved further to the east than anticipated. Not only did this change the location of the attack, but it also wasted time. The attack wouldn't start at 1 p.m. like planned. It would be 3 p.m. before Hardee and Stewart assaulted Thomas's lines. Most historians have now agreed that the delay didn't affect the preparedness of Thomas's troops, but the shift may have worked to Hood's advantage. It lined up two of his corps to hit the end of Thomas's line, as a gap had emerged between his army and the rest of the army group to the east. Late in the morning on the 20th, Hood told a newspaper correspondent from the Savannah Republican that, "At 1 I attack the enemy. He has pressed our lines until he is within a short distance of Atlanta. I must fight or evacuate. I am going to fight. The odds are against us, but I'll leave the issue with the God of battles." For all Hood's failures, he had constructed a battle plan that placed his attacking force as numerically equal as one could get in this campaign by engaging the isolated Army of the Cumberland. At around 3 p.m., Hardee's and Stewart's corps stepped off. In Hardee's front, his corps outnumbered the lone division of John Newton around 5-1, but problems arose almost immediately. For one, Bates' division got lost in the dense forest surrounding Peachtree Creek. His brigades sought in vain to find the Union left flank. The in-echelon attack then brought William H. T. Walker's division into action against the brigade of John Blake. Walker's brigades overlapped the Union line, and two brigades, those under Hugh Mercer and States Rights Gist, moved past the Union flank and made it into the rear of the Union line, less than half a mile from the creek. A conglomeration of regiments dispatched from Luther Bradley's brigade and placed under the direct command of Emerson Opdyke engaged the rebels. Additionally, George Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga, saw the flank was in danger and personally led artillery batteries to the location and blasted away at the approaching Gray soldiers. The artillery and musketry became too much for both brigades, and they fell back in confusion. Walker's other brigade, under Connecticut-born Clement Stevens, became embroiled in an exchange of musketry with Blake's men. In the attack, Stevens was hit by a bullet in the head behind the right ear. He lingered for a few days, then died. His body was shipped to Charleston, South Carolina for burial. Bradley dispatched the 42nd Illinois to Blake's line to give it weight against the Confederates, who, although retreating, kept up their fire. The next division from Hardee's corps to make the in-echelon attack was that commanded by George Maney. From most accounts, Maney essentially stopped before making an attack, content with firing from a distance at the enemy. The reason is unclear why Maney's men didn't make much of an attack, but at least one officer stated that they couldn't get the men to come out of the protection of a ravine. Nathan Kimball's men put up tough resistance too. Seeing the approaching rebels, Bradley sent the 51st Illinois and Blake sent the 28th Kentucky and 97th Ohio to Kimball's assistance. Hardee's attack had been a failure. His nickname was Old Reliable, but on this battlefield, he didn't live up to his name. This was the poorest performance of Hardee's Civil War career, but the battle wasn't over. More divisions were on their way to slam into the Union line.